From the nation's capital, the Conservative Caucus presents Conservative Roundtable, an in-depth look at today's most important issues.
Welcome to Conservative Roundtable. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors these broadcasts. And we're delighted to have as our guest for this program a repeat offender, someone who's been here before, a man who's an expert on almost everything, especially including budget issues. Now, Brian, I know you undoubtedly follow the controversy about raising the debt ceiling and the budget and so forth. What is your view of the deal that was done?
I don't have a very high opinion of the deal that was eventually cut. I know that you're hearing the big debate throughout America. The left is trying to demonize the Tea Party movement, say the Tea Party movement pushed too hard. But we're in a situation where the debt limit was increased by about $2.4 trillion, and there were some reforms added to the debt ceiling increase, which is something that really hasn't happened in the past. So it's a victory in the sense that finally we're debating cutting spending. There was a cut, cap, and balance bill that was passed by the House, never taken up by the Senate. But in the end, I think conservatives can agree that it was a terrible deal that was cut. It wasn't something that conservatives were overjoyed about, but at least the debate has started in the balanced budget amendment.
How will you assess the role played by John Boehner, the Republican Speaker of the House?
Well, I think John Boehner was in a very difficult situation. I don't excuse the deal that was cut in the end, but you know, he clearly is not in control of very much. I mean, he's got control of the House, so pretty much the Speaker can pass
to the
whatever he
degree that he can keep the Tea Party and the others in line.
That's right. But in the end, I mean, I think the deal that was cut, and he talked about his negotiations with the president, I think he succeeded in the sense that he did help get cut, cap, and get balance passed in the House. But where I think leaders, Republican leaders in the House and Senate fell down on the job was that they allowed themselves to go behind closed doors with the president, engage in secret negotiations where the American people were not allowed in to see what was being done. They ended up, those negotiations fell apart a week before the arbitrary deadline set by Secretary of the Treasury Tim Geithner, and then they ended up having to pass a bill within 1 week, and it turned out not to be a great bill.
I had a very interesting meeting with Mitch McConnell in his office in Kentucky when he was thinking of running for the U.S. Senate, and I have followed his career very closely. What kind of a job did he do as the Republican leader in the Senate?
Well, it's funny, the leadership in the Senate, it's a great title, but you don't really have all that much power. Even Harry Reid, you know, the majority leader of the Senate, has 53 Democrats that he controls, so he can basically control the agenda, but even he doesn't have all that much power to control anything but what is debated in the Senate. So Mitch McConnell, you know, he's another one that has a very tough job keeping his caucus in line. You have a strange caucus in the Senate where you have the more liberal-leaning Republicans like Olympia Snowe and Susan Collins of Maine. You have Scott Brown of Massachusetts, and then you have your conservatives like Rand Paul of Kentucky and Mike Lee of Utah and Jim DeMint of South Carolina. So he has such a divergent caucus, and in the end, I mean, I didn't feel great about how that debate worked out. I think conservatives could have gotten a lot more if they pushed harder, but in the end, the deal wasn't good, but it may have been the best that Republicans could have gotten.
Now, there are some Republican senators who are putatively conservative who are facing challenges in this year's election season. One of them is Dick Lugar.
Yes.
And what's the name of the fellow from Indiana? You know.
Oh, yeah, no, Lugar, Indiana Lugar, and then
from the West.
I'm sorry, Orrin Hatch.
Yeah, oh, that's right.
Orrin Hatch of Utah, yep.
I remember meeting Orrin Hatch when he was a Pittsburgh lawyer, and I had been supporting a guy named John Carlson for the U.S. Senate nomination, who was head of the National Association of Manufacturers, very decent guy. Orrin Hatch came in and wooed us about what a tremendous senator he was going to be, and frankly, he's been a huge disappointment to me. I remember trying to work with him on some issues that were important to me, and he said, well, Howard, you know, in my heart, I'm sympathetic with you, but I am not going to get behind any piece of legislation where I can't muster at least 30 votes in support of the position I take. Otherwise, I won't be taken seriously. And old Orrin has been a disappointment. I'm glad to see that he's facing a real primary challenge.
Oh, sure.
And if you look at his voting record, it's gotten a little bit better lately.
Yeah, it has. Yeah, it has. But that's a function of the Utah primary system. I mean, they have a convention.
Yeah, of course, losing Bennett
yes.
should have been an inspiration to him.
And Mike Lee, I mean, you look at that state, it's produced Mike Lee, who's a great Tea Party senator.
Yeah.
And I think that example, actually, when you look at the Mike Lee election, that was the first time when a Tea Party member won. He won very early in the process, so he was the first fight that Tea Partiers won, and that led to the great victories for the Tea Party in the fall of 2010.
I sent a letter to Senator Lee today. He's a big supporter of the balanced budget amendment, which sounds good, but I'm strongly opposed to it. Sure. And Charles Orndorff, our administrative vice chairman at the caucus, has written an excellent piece explaining the pitfalls
yes.
inherent in the various balanced budget amendments. And one of the big pitfalls is the shift in power over legislation from Congress to the president, which is anti-constitutional, very dangerous. And I hope that Senator Lee and other Republicans pushing the balanced budget amendment will carefully reconsider their position. But there are some good Republican senators who've come along recently. Sure. Who are the ones who impress you the most?
Mike Lee. I mean, Mike Lee is a great senator from Utah who's come in and pushing. I mean, he immediately came in and pushed a balanced budget amendment, which excites a lot of conservatives because in the text of his balanced budget amendment, you need a supermajority of 2/3 vote to increase taxes. He limits the size of government to 18% of the gross domestic product of the United States, which is awkward to put that in the Constitution. But he's basically fighting a fight to shrink government. So I like him. Rand Paul, I think, has been great. Obviously, he's very libertarian-leaning like his dad. But he's come in to the Senate guns blazing. I mean, he really has come in fighting, ready to filibuster, use the tools of the Senate to fight legislation.
He's his daddy's son.
He is. And Jim DeMint's clearly still been a great senator. But of the new members, you also have Pat Toomey, who's done some pretty good work coming from Pennsylvania, somebody who's been pushed very hard on the debt limit increase for something called the Full Faith and Credit Act that would have forced the administration to make decisions on what bills to pay and what bills not to pay if the debt limit wasn't increased. So those are some great new senators that have expanded the Conservative Caucus in the Senate exponentially. I mean, you pretty much had Jim DeMint and not many others going into last year.
Well, this program will be broadcast following the Iowa straw poll. But do you have any sense of how the various presidential prospects are doing? Is Romney, in your view, a solid front runner? What about, what is it, Huntsman? Is that how he says his name? Who is fighting it out for the Utah support? How well will Michelle Bachmann do? Is Santorum still going to be here after the straw poll? Is Pawlenty still going to be here? You know, one just doesn't know. It'll be interesting to see how well Ron Paul does.
Yeah.
He's raised a great deal of money, and he may surprise people with a strong showing.
Yeah, I mean, I love that Ron Paul talks so much about the Fed. He's done such a great service to America by talking about the out-of-control power that the Fed wields and what they've been doing. And they're considering doing another quantitative easing, QE3, which would be devastating, just to print more money and throw it out into the economy as a means to stimulate economic growth, because we know that doesn't work. It causes inflation. I mean, I love that Ron Paul is somebody who's willing to talk about the gold standard. And
it's interesting to see that gold is now over $1,700 an ounce, and that while the dollar is sinking, the Swiss franc is holding firm and rising because of the stability behind it in Switzerland.
Exactly. I mean, we need a stable monetary policy, and we're not seeing it now. We're seeing the opposite of what we should be seeing with the Fed just printing money and just trying to put liquidity into the economy. I mean, it is executive branch Keynesian economics which has failed. I mean, it's failed when President Obama tried to do it with a stimulus plan. It's failing miserably with the Fed invoking many of these similar policies.
Well, we're going to have to take a bit of a break before we come back and go into these details, into these issues in greater detail. But we're delighted to have with us Brian Darling, who plays a key role with the Heritage Foundation and is probably the number one expert for our side on the budget issues being faced in Congress. And I want to find out from you if you think we're ever going to be able to get rid of that multi-trillion-dollar debt. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back with Brian Darling. I'm Howard Phillips for the Conservative Caucus.
Hi, I'm Marsha Blackburn from Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. Just as you hear every couple of years, this is an important election. And I think for those of us who are conservatives, this is indeed a very crucial election. Everything's on the ballot, and this is one of those years to show up and be counted and make your conservative voice heard. Whether it is reducing federal spending, reducing the size of the bureaucracy, or securing our border. These are issues that are of primary importance to us. And I hope that all of our conservatives are going to show up and vote to protect faith, family, freedom, hope, and opportunity.
Hi, I'm United States Representative Thaddeus McCotter from Michigan's 11th Congressional District. As we enter a new millennium of hope and peril, with so many problems besetting our country and yet so many opportunities before us, it is oftentimes tempting to think that your voice doesn't matter. What can one person do to make a difference in the life of their community and their country? Well, the first thing you can do is to contact your legislator. You are one of the sovereign citizens of the United States. You elect your servants to work for you in Congress. Let them know what you think. Send them a letter, send them an email, call them on the phone. Your voice matters. Because if you don't raise your voice in the interests of our free republic, who will?
Welcome back. I'm Howard Phillips, chairman of the Conservative Caucus, which sponsors Conservative Roundtable. We're delighted to have as our guest Brian Darling, who's an expert on just about everything. Brian writes a regular column for the great conservative newspaper, Human Events. He's senior fellow in government studies at the Heritage Foundation. He monitors political developments in the U.S. Senate, the House, and the White House. And his comments are widely quoted by leading newspapers and websites. He's frequently on talk radio. He has served as counsel to then-Senator Mel Martinez of Florida, and he was general counsel to my dear friend, Senator Bob Smith of New Hampshire. And in that capacity, he staffed the Judiciary Committee. While with Smith, Brian was a chief strategist for legislation allowing commercial airline pilots to carry firearms in flight. How many are doing it now?
About 15,000 right now.
So now there are 15,000 well-armed pilots.
Yeah. And that's thanks to Senator Bob Smith for all of his great work in doing that, because you look at what the federal government did after 9/11, that's one of the few accomplishments in securing our airports and securing our planes from a 9/11 style attack.
One of the great defeats of recent years was the loss of that young fellow, Elian Gonzalez, to Fidel Castro. My family and I were heavily involved in that battle. Bob Smith was the lead guy trying to defend Elian Gonzalez. You worked very closely with Bob Smith. And in addition to many other things, graduate of the University of Mass. You're a graduate of the New England School of Law. You were a partner in Washington lobbying firm. You're a fellow Massachusetts native. You grew up in Andover. I grew up in Boston. And you have a daughter, and you and your wife and your daughter live in D.C. How are we ever going to get rid of this multi-trillion-dollar debt that has grown so great under Barack Obama?
Yeah, and we're talking about $14.5 trillion in debt as a nation. It's an outrageous sum of money. It's an outrageous. You think about the gross domestic product, the amount of economic output we have in one year, That's the same as the amount of debt we're carrying as a nation, and that's outrageous. And we may be going down the road of Greece and Portugal and all these other countries that can't meet their debt obligations.
Have confronted disasters in Europe.
Yeah, and so we're even having a hard time balancing our budget on a year-to-year basis. So I think the first battle is to try and balance a budget. I mean, we're carrying a $1.5, $1.6 trillion debt this year. Next year, it's expected to be $1.3 trillion. So we're not even thinking about cutting that debt obligation that we owe. We're just building, and expanding government on a day-to-day basis.
Is there any Republican presidential candidate who takes this issue seriously and places antidotes to it at the center of his or her campaign?
Well, I think you're going to hear, I think thanks to the Tea Party movement and thanks to the fact that you have this core of conservatives out there that want to see the size and scope of the federal government shrunk, you're going to see guys like Ron Paul talking about getting rid of whole departments like the Department of Education, Department of Energy.
That's something which the Conservative Caucus has focused on. We have pointed out that most of what the federal government does now is not authorized in the Constitution. And our position is, if it is not constitutionally authorized, out with it.
Yeah,
off with their head.
The National Endowment for the Arts, the fact that we are funding that organization when we have so much debt, first of all, it's not constitutionally based. And second of all...
And they had a Ministry of Culture in the Soviet Union. We don't need one here.
That's right. But when you're talking about this debt and this heaping debt in future generations, we're going to have a debate this fall about this. Some call it a super Congress, a super commission that's going to try and find 1.2, 1.5 trillion in cuts over the next 10 years. That's a drop in the bucket.
And 10 years is a pretty long time. And this year doesn't bind next year.
That's right. It's impossible. I mean, the debt deal that was cut by Congress, the American people are being sold this idea that the federal government just cut $2 trillion or cut $900 billion, and it's a down payment on another $1.5 trillion. But the American people need to understand two things. This debt deal increases debt by $6 trillion over the next 10 years. So it didn't cut spending. It just slowed the growth of spending.
Do you think the American people understand how far astray Barack Obama is leading us?
I think they do. I think you look at the poll numbers, the president's doing horribly. I mean, you go state by state and look state by state in states that the president needs to win re-election. He's not going to win. If the election were today, he would have a hard time beating a sock puppet. I mean, he would have a hard time beating any candidate that's being promoted out there. So his poll numbers are terrible. The economy's not going in the right direction. And that's great.
Will he be challenged within the Democratic Party?
Maybe. I think you might see.
Who might do it?
Well, maybe Mike Gravel. I saw some news reports that Mike.
He's another Massachusetts boy.
Yeah, that's right.
He's from Springfield, Mass.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, well, I met him, and he's a fascinating character, and I'd love to see a principled person on the left run against Obama, because if you're a liberal, this guy hasn't even stood up for all of the promises he made to become president. I mean, he was wildly popular with the left because he said, I'm going to do these things. I'm going to pull the troops out of Iraq. That didn't happen. And
Afghanistan.
In Afghanistan, I'm going to slow down the troops in Afghanistan. That hasn't happened. I'm going to shut down Guantanamo Bay. That hasn't happened. You go promise by promise to the left, and he hasn't even completed those promises. So I don't see where his base of support is.
And he could face a serious challenge within his own party.
Yeah.
Some people have even speculated that he might determine to retire.
Well, that would. I don't think it's in him to retire. I mean,
his ego won't let him.
We've seen so many press conferences where the president talks about himself and all the work he's done. He doesn't promote any real solutions, and he seems to be very impressed with his speaking ability, and I think that isn't shared by the American people.
Well, the secret Republican plan is to steal his teleprompter.
That's right, or cut the wires to it. But, I mean, the president, he has not communicated a plan to the American people on how to turn the economy around. I mean, we need to lower regulation, lower taxes, get rid of unconstitutional programs. You'll never hear the president talk about that. And you won't even hear him talking about serious proposals that will help all of these areas of the country that are hurting bad.
What about the issue of his not being a natural-born citizen of the U.S.? What if it were determined that he is not a natural-born citizen, that he does not live up to the constitutional requirements for a president? What would the legal consequence of that be?
Well, something like that may be determined well after he's out of office, because I don't think the president is going to be reelected. I don't see how that happens. No economist is projecting that the economy is going to turn around as quickly as it needs to for the president to win re-election.
Who would the Democrats nominate for president if Barack Obama were not on the scene?
Well, if you're looking at the universe of people out there, I mean, maybe they'd go back to John Kerry. Maybe they would look to one of the newer leaders in the Senate. I mean, I look at Dick Durbin, another senator from Illinois, where Barack Obama served in the Senate. I can't imagine Chuck Schumer would be a very popular candidate from New York. But you look at the leadership in the Senate where they would probably look, and I think the Democratic bench is a bit thin.
It might be an outsider, just as Gene McCarthy fared strongly as an outsider when he ran for the presidency in 1968.
Yeah, maybe it will be somebody coming from the outside and trying to run. I mean, it just looks grim right now. I have to imagine that Democrats, as we get closer to election time, are going to stop supporting the president when they see his poll numbers continue to go down.
They've got to cover their own base, and they want to be reelected or elected. And the closer they are to Barack Obama, the more difficult that will be for them.
That's the truth. That's the truth. The poll numbers right now are just abysmal. I mean, the president is not a popular president, and I don't see those numbers turning around anytime in the near future.
Will Republicans in the House be able to hold their majority?
If you had to look now, I mean, you never know a year out. You never know what's going to happen. But right now, Republicans look like they may expand their majority in the House. They should pick up seats in the Senate no matter what, with all the Democrats that are retiring. So you have to imagine that the House and Senate will be controlled by Republicans after the next election.
What has been the impact of the Tea Party?
Huge. I mean, the Tea Party, the reason why you're hearing leftists claim that the Tea Party is racist, claim that the Tea Party uses terrorist tactics, is because the left doesn't have any real arguments to beat down the Tea Party. They're just name-calling. They really are in a campaign, a comprehensive campaign to demonize members of the Tea Party, because the Tea Party has been so effective in getting Americans energized the idea of constitutional conservatism and to shrink the size and scope of the federal government.
We're going to have to take a break. When we come back, you'll have a few minutes to focus on those things that are most important to you, things that you believe our viewers need to learn and act upon. Please stay with us. We'll be back very soon with Brian Darling, who is a key expert on the budget issues and other issues facing the country. Stay with us.
You are a defender of liberty. You spoke out.
That's part of your job.
You were heard in Congress.
No.
You marched. You created a new movement. You endured attacks.
You see folks waving tea bags around.
Now you can help to
repeal the bill.
Go to sendthematmessage.com. Print the pledge to repeal Obamacare. Send it to your representative, senators, and candidates to sign that they pledge to
repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill. Repeal the bill.
Repeal the bill. Now.
Go to sendthematmessage.com and help.
Repeal the bill.
Hello, I'm Steve Forbes, chairman of Forbes Media, here to urge you to watch Conservative Roundtable if you want to learn about the issues that matter and what you can do to get our country back on the right track.
Welcome back. If you're interested in the kinds of issues we discuss on Conservative Roundtable, I hope you'll contact us. Our website is www.conservativeusa.org, or drop us a note at our national headquarters, 450 Maple Avenue East, Vienna, Virginia, 22180. With no cost or obligation, we'll send you more information. Brian, we only have a little bit of time left, but I know there's some important things you want to share with our audience.
Yeah, this one very important issue is this commission that was set up as part of the debt limit increase. It sets up what some people call a super Congress. It'll be 6 members of the House and the Senate that will get together, that will make big determinations. They'll put together a piece of legislation, submit it to Congress by Thanksgiving, which has to be acted on by Congress by Christmas.
And it'll probably be a real turkey.
It'll be a real turkey, and they can actually attach unrelated legislation to this. So conservatives need to keep a close eye on the super Congress.
It's a quasi-legislative body without the accountability that a real legislative body ought to have.
That's right. That's a huge problem, and the American people need to force transparency in this group.
Brian, as always, you've been a real asset to us. Thanks for joining us on Conservative Roundtable. Keep up your very important work. I'll see you again next time.
Thank you so much. It's
and
an
thanks
honor.
for watching.